Welcome everyone, I'm Tony Gleeson, I'm AIRAH's Chief Executive, and I want to welcome you today to this Streamline webinar, Opportunities to Create Value through HVAC Maintenance. Now, today's webinar is very important because it's not only about the opportunities for our industry, it's about how we can make a significant difference to our community and to the environment as whole. And as part of that, I think it's always worth to understand, if we move to the next slide, Marie, where we've come from. And I want to firstly acknowledge the traditional owners of the country throughout Australia where we all meet today, recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and community. And I want to pay out my respects to the cultures, to their elders, both past, present and emerging. And in this vein, it's an opportunity for us to explore this whole concept of HVAC&R maintenance in the mid-tier space. And you'll have an opportunity throughout today to be able to ask some questions. Now, there is a chat function at the bottom of your screen. If you want to ask some questions, please put your questions in that box below. It's the Q&A function, I should say. It's in the bottom of your screen. It's labeled Q&A. And our team will work through those questions throughout the day to be able to provide you some answers and also feedback to the various presenters. So as we move into today, according to Opportunities Knox report, the mid-tier sector makes up about 80% of office building and 50% of the office spaces. Now, these buildings and workplaces really house hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of Australians, from financial professionals to government administrators and just about every other type of office role that keeps our economy and country running. And although these buildings aren't massive towers in size, so to speak, compared to what we see around the city, they are there to make to be a safe, reliable, comfortable, and efficient place for people to work in. And but by making it efficient, it also helps us to be able to impact our environment in which we live and work. So today we've put together a panel of experts in the HVAC maintenance field who can really give us the insights about them working in the mid-tier. They've also be able to give us some feedback about what that path is to better maintenance, how we can add value to our cities, to our business and to the greater environment. We'll also hear first though from Daniel Daly from the University of Wollongong. He's been working on a national survey. And that's important that you on this survey, on this webinar today, please make sure you disseminate and spread that to other people. We really need to get feedback about this space and how we can improve it. And it's impacting in turn, giving us a great opportunity to make a difference to our environment, to the economy, and to the people that work in it. So I hope you today enjoy the webinar. I'd like you to pass you over now to Daniel Daly from the University of Wollongong. And Daniel, thank you for being part of this today.
So thanks for the introduction, Tony. And yeah, my name's Dan Daly. I'm a research fellow from the Sustainable Buildings Research Centre at the University of Wollongong. And I'm just going to give you a quick introduction to this survey before we let the panel cut loose on solving some of the problems in the mid-tier sector. We're currently running a survey. You saw the slide previously. The URL that I'm going to say as many times as I can today is betterwaystowork.com.au. And this is a survey across the country of the people involved in managing and maintaining Australia's mid-tier office buildings. We haven't used the word mid-tier. We're talking about the older, smaller, lower quality commercial office buildings. So there's a bit more of a descriptive definition there. So if you work in one of those buildings or you know someone who does, as a facilities manager or for you guys, maintenance engineers, then we're really keen to hear your experience of working in that sector. What are we actually doing? Well, we're trying to get at the expertise and what's happening on the ground for managing and maintaining these mid-tier buildings. We're running the first national whole of sector survey. So we're not just surveying HVAC contractors and HVAC engineers. We're also talking to facilities managers, real estate agents, engineers, I guess, across the whole spectrum of people involved in management and maintenance of these buildings. We know some things about the mid-tier sector. So there has been studies previously that have identified, I guess, some of the issues, some of the opportunities, but really what we're trying to do with this survey is put some hard data behind those previous studies, which I guess have been based more on case study approaches or some limited data sets in one state or a different or one certain sector of the mid-tier. We also know, I guess, the top end of the town, the commercial buildings, they've been performing very well. We know that. We also have known about these problems in the mid-tier for a long time. So we're focusing very much on your involvement in the older, poorer quality, smaller buildings that might not be in the CBD. They might not be the high-rise in the CBD, the regional areas, rural areas, out in the suburbs. So the survey itself, we're collecting quantitative and qualitative data. So we want to know some of the very simple statistics about how many people are out there working on these type of buildings, where is the work being done, what type of work is being done, but also some more qualitative information about why the work's being done and how it's happening, that sort of stuff. The survey takes a little while. It's about 15 minutes if you run through in one go. But I guess we see it as this one opportunity to shine a light on this sector, collect the information that then can serve going forward to ground policy decisions and some hard evidence. A bit about the gaps and a bit about us. So the team involved in designing and running the survey, we're a multidisciplinary team based at the University of Wollongong. So there's some of us from the Sustainable Buildings Research Centre and some from the Australian Centre for Cultural Environment, Space and something else. I'll get to that on the next slide. But we're getting the view from I guess, different angles there. One of the big gaps that we're trying to address is that the mid-tier is this quite amorphous large sector. So we're really trying to break it down into some more workable chunks so that then at those smaller levels, we can help to design different approaches to how to improve the energy efficiency in that space. And I guess as part of that, we're hoping to capture the diversity of experience to complement some of the more simple assumptions that are made when we're modelling this sector. So as I say, we want your good stories, we want your bad stories, we want the diversity of experience that you have when you're working in this space. Who is involved in the running of the survey? Well, anyone who's anyone in the mid-tier sector. So it's funded by the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources, and we have a really nice and close working relationship with the team there. As I mentioned, there's the two research groups from the University of Wollongong, SBRC and Access, the Australian Centre for Cultural Environment, Society and Space, forgot the society. And we're also working closely with a lot of the peak bodies in this area. So most notably, I guess, Facilities Management Association, FMA and AIRAH, but we're also working with AMCA, ARC and AREMA. So yeah, we're really trying to cut across the different parties involved. So who do we want to do the survey? Everyone who works in the mid-tier sector, basically. Our main target is facilities management, facilities managers and HVAC contractors. We're hoping to get a scale, so we want a lot of people to do the survey. We've tried as hard as we can to make it as short as we possibly can, as painless as we can. So we've made it mobile friendly. It's quite, reasonably nice to look at and user friendly. So still takes about 15 minutes. We tried as hard as we could to make it short. But yeah, we're hoping as many people will do it as possible across the country, but also CBD, rural, regional, all that sort of stuff. And importantly, we want, I guess, the experience of employees on the front line. So we don't just want one person in a company or an organisation to do the survey. We want as many different people in an organisation to do it. And we don't just want the view from head office, I guess. We want the experience of people who are out there in the buildings doing the work. So if you have been sent the link or if you've come across the link, I really encourage you to share it to your peers and your colleagues and try and get it out there to as many people as possible. We're also surveying consultants and engineers and property managers and other people who are involved in the sector. Really, the defining thing is anyone who's working on older, smaller, poorer quality buildings. We're hoping to understand their experience of energy and HVAC in that sector. And I guess the key thing is the data in this sector is very hard to come by, and we know that the owners are quite hard to get in touch with, tenants are hard to group, it's hard to find, it's a hard to fix sector. So yeah, the more information that we can get through you guys, the better for us in terms of designing responses. What data are we collecting? So we have 5 sections in the survey. The first one is just about what your current role is. What's your job? How big's your company? Where do you work? Section 2 is about the buildings you work on. What's the tenant structure? What type of equipment's there? Section 3 is about the work that you do in these buildings. So, what types of work make up your average weekly workload? Why do you get called out most commonly? Once you get there, what are the most common faults? How do you win work? How's the work specified? That kind of things. Then there's a section about you, about your industry background. And then the most exciting section, if you want, you can leave your details, your contact details, and you go into the draw to win one of 40 $100 gift vouchers. At the moment, the odds are about 1 in 20, so it's pretty good odds that you might get a $100 voucher. Important to note, the data is anonymous, so it's managed by the university's strict ethics processes. We at the university are the only ones who hold the raw data, so the raw responses. Everything that goes back to the federal department or any of the partner organisations will be our, I guess, aggregate information, our processed de-identified information. Another thing to note is that you can pick up and put down the survey as you're going. So if you start it, as long as you go back on the same device that you started it, you can do it. So if you find a minute here and a minute there, you can still get through the survey. And yeah, just reiterating, this is sort of our one chance. The survey's been live for a little while now and it'll stay open for a little bit longer, but we see it as quite a unique opportunity to get some different perspectives on this complex sector. And finally, what's in it? What's in it for you? So what's in it for us? It's obvious, but what's in it for you? Well, as I say, this is a pretty unique opportunity to contribute to policy development on energy efficiency in this sector of the buildings. And we are really looking for feedback and information from people who are actively involved in maintenance and management of these buildings, from the basement to the boardroom. So yeah, we want to hear your experiences, good, bad or ugly, whatever they may be. And as I say, the odds are pretty good at the moment. It's about 1 in 20 chance of winning a $100 gift voucher for taking 15 minutes out of your time. So yeah, it's a pretty good odds. Anyway, thanks for your time. I'm really looking forward to hear what the panel has to say about the mid-tier sector. I'm sure that they'll be struggling to keep on time because there's so much to say about this sector. So I'm not going to go on anymore, but just to say www.betterwaystowork.com.au. Share it around amongst your colleagues and your peers. Yeah, we're really hoping to get the word out as much as we can. All right, thanks a lot. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you very much for that. And again, I encourage all people involved here today not to share it around, but also talk about it. But just don't do the survey just this minute, because we want to hand you over to Bruce Precious. Bruce has worked in the industry for a number of years, written a number of articles, has presented at various AIRAH conferences, and has consulted to government and commercial operations and alike over this period of time. And Bruce, I'll hand it over to you to your panel of experts to explore ways we can actually improve in this sector. So Bruce, over to you.
Fantastic, thank you. Thank you, Tony, and thank you for everybody that's joined in the discussion today and has come online for this important discussion for our industry. And it's important because this project is not only seeking to deliver environmental outcomes, but it has the opportunity to deliver real economic benefit to our community and broader community benefits. So it's a great discussion to be part of, and I thank AIRAH for the invitation to provide some opening remarks, some context that I'd like to provide, and then I'll introduce our expert panel, and we'll have a broader discussion around this sector of buildings, this great sector of buildings that holds so much opportunity. And of course, I'd remind everybody that particularly during the panel discussion, please put your questions into the Q&A area, and we'll hope to reserve a little time at the end to get to those questions. So in terms of opening remarks and some context on the mid-tier, and there's been a lot of discussion behind the scenes around, does anybody understand what mid-tier means? Should we call it the non-premium commercial buildings sector? But to define and to provide that piece of context, what do these buildings look like that we're talking about? Well, they tend to be a little bit older. The plant and equipment is likely older. The plant might be relying on older phased out refrigerants, which introduces its own problems. The buildings are certainly smaller than those big towers that we always think of in the CBDs. They're smaller buildings. They might still be in the CBD, but they're smaller buildings. They're the types of buildings that we might see in metropolitan regional areas. Another common characteristic will be that there's less integration of sensors and automation. If you've got a 7-day time clock instead of just a 24-hour time clock, that might be an advantage. But you know, commonly across these buildings, there's less integration of automation. Another characteristic is there's no dedicated facility manager. If you're lucky, you might have a facility manager that's looking after a portfolio of 30 buildings. So the amount of time that they can dedicate to each of these buildings is very limited. So the management responsibility falls on somebody that's probably got a greater background in real estate and not in facilities management. These buildings are unlikely to have a neighbour's energy rating, and often they'll be ancillary to some other type of facility. So office buildings are associated maybe with a manufacturing plant, or office buildings that are part of the administration block for a hospital, for instance. Sometimes the owner of the property is not a property professional. The building is an investment, potentially from a foreign investor. And often it'll be part of a diverse portfolio. So their understanding of property as an investment class will be somewhat limited. Commonly, the expenditure is managed from a zero baseline. That means there is no budget. There's no budget for routine maintenance, and there's no budget for breakdown maintenance. And that presents its own problems. Certainly people that are in the building aren't facilities managers. They're people trying to get on with their own jobs. They're administrators or surveyors, doctors, software developers, accountants. They're no lesser important jobs in our community than those that are in those premium CBD towers. But they're in a different environment. And they're people that deserve that their working day in and out is safe, comfortable, and is in a clean environment. So there is this underlying impression that with these mid-tier or non-premium commercial buildings, that there's opportunities to make them safer buildings, not only for the people that work in those, directly work in those buildings, but equally safer for the technicians and service personnel that visit those buildings and might make their way around to plant rooms. They're safer through having guards on equipment, safer by eliminating confined spaces, safer by ensuring that switchboards are kept locked. There's a whole range of ways that buildings can be made safer. They can be made more comfortable and more productive by ensuring that the air conditioning is performing effectively and allowing people to get on with their work. And as Dan alluded, these buildings probably have great opportunity for efficiency savings. Now that saves energy, reduces the bills, it reduces load on the grid, particularly on those hot summer constrained days, and it reduces those energy related greenhouse gas emissions. So we have all of these opportunities, and I can imagine people thinking, yeah, if only there was a maintenance budget, we could deliver on some of those opportunities. But in each of those areas, there's money being wasted. If the building's not running efficiently, there's money being wasted. If there's safety problems, there's money being wasted through productivity loss. If the building is unproductive because of poor temperature control or poor indoor environment quality management, there's money being wasted. The opportunity is to turn some of that money around to get it into the maintenance function so that we can improve the performance of those buildings. So that's the opportunity. Can we realise it, I guess, is part of the question. And it suggests that there's market failure, because certainly, you know, the economists would say, well, those savings should be realised. They should come about through the normal operation of those buildings. And if they don't, then there's a market failure that needs to be attended to. And that's what I think part of what the government will look for in the results of this survey, to understand the roles of the various players from AIRAH, from government, from owners, from operators and occupants, as to the role they play in ensuring we get the optimum performance from this very significant portion of our built environment. So I'm going to introduce our three expert panellists today and thank them for joining us. Firstly, we have Pat McManus. Pat's the National Business Development Manager from Airmaster. And many of you will know Airmaster is an award-winning building services company providing HVAC and R management, smart building solutions and fire services across Australia, New Zealand and Southeast Asia. We also welcome Gary Ward. Gary is Senior Contracts Manager at Ellis. Since 1964, Ellis has been delivering new HVAC systems and providing mechanical services maintenance across Australia. And thirdly, we have James Spears from DeltaQ, and James is Principal Consultant for DeltaQ, a specialist team of Australia's leading building energy optimisation experts. So welcome to the three of you. Thanks for joining us. And maybe we should kick off. There's I can coin a new phrase, I think. There's an elephant in the Zoom. And the elephant in the Zoom is compliance. So I wanted to open the discussion up with Gary and then Pat. Gary and Pat, your companies are often called in to work on these non-premium buildings. So let's go straight to the risks around fire safety and compliance. HVAC has a significant role to play around fire safety. How do you describe the state of play right now? If we go to Gary first.
In my role at Ellis, I visit a number of clients. We have the premium buildings and a mixture of non-premium as well. I find when I go out to the non-premium buildings that the facilities teams, the facilities manager or the building operators don't have the knowledge of the required testing regimes, especially for the fire and smoke control. Usually we ask for the building occupancy permit. On the building occupancy permit, it states the essential safety measures and the standards that they need to maintain the building to. So in some cases, the facilities teams or manager does not know or have a building occupancy permit. That comes as a bit of a shock sometimes to them. And when we point out that there is a requirement, or we ask what the incumbent provider does, or when they do the fire testing, we actually get met with, sort of hands in the air. They don't really have any of that testing done. So it is a particular worry, because without the relevant building surveyor puts down the testing regime and the standards are there to test fire and smoke control systems for the mitigation of smoke during a general fire alarm for that building. Now, these systems are put in place not to fight the fire, but these systems are put in place to allow people, the occupants of that building, more time to exit that building should a fire take place. Now, they stipulate strict testing regimes for individual pieces of equipment, and it's all prescribed. The standard's called 1851, and that needs to be complied with. without that testing, that equipment, and bearing in mind that equipment is only used during fire and all the time, so that equipment can sit there with a fault without being tested, could sit there for a number of years. When we go along and actually do these testing, we do find fault with the systems across these buildings, and that's why you do the testing, to find the faults, to flush them out, and to repair the systems so that they do operate under a general fire alarm, and allow people to exit the building in a timely manner. And failure to maintain these systems is a particular worry, because in a worst case scenario, it could end with the loss of human life, and that's a serious thing. So there you go.
Absolutely. Thanks, Gary. And Pat, your view on the state of play currently in terms of compliance?
Yeah, well, Gary's words reflect my thoughts and experiences pretty much. I do find one that seems to pop up more in those buildings, 50s and 60s and 70s. That was when they really first started integrating smoke management into their smoke management systems into their design of the HVAC systems, and particularly the top end of Collins Street and the bottom end of Queen Street in Victoria. And I've also seen it in Sydney and less so in Adelaide, but the main drags of Adelaide is that have been incorporated in the design of the lobby of the building. And over the years, the owners realised that the lobby is quite an open space that could have been used for letting out. So they increased the lettable area of the floors, and as a consequence, they've pulled out what could be a smoke zone wall or a fire zone wall, and basically undermined the whole integrity of the building. And obviously the diagrams and the original data is not around, but you can see from the existing infrastructure what the intent was originally, and it's very hard to convince an owner to take floor back away from the tenant and bring it back into the common areas. That also gets exposed a little bit in Neighbours, but it is a problem, and quite often they also avoid upgrading the standards of the whole building, not intentionally in most instances, but by doing floor-by-floor renovations. And obviously, if you hit the trigger mark, I think it's 60% of a renovation of a building, then you have to bring it into current code. Quite often we find that too, that it's been done piecemeal. So over the years, it's gradually been stripped out of that original design intent. There is, you mentioned some statistics about the amount of buildings that represent within the whole percentage. I'm surprised it's that many, but it doesn't surprise me in a way as well. There's a lot of these buildings we hardly ever come across. They never seem to get into the market. Gary and I quite regularly compete for the same buildings, the same portfolios, and they come up every 3 or 5 years, but they only represent 15% of the whole CBDs across Australia. And what's going on with the other 75, 85%? You probably find it's old money that's had it for years and years, and the same technician's always been looking after it until he retires and he hands on to his son, who knows, or daughter. There's a lot of them that just fly under the radar, and as Gary pointed out, they don't have OC permits, and definitely don't have a maintenance determination and fire damper registers, and it's quite a challenge to get them to accept the fact that they've got to spend considerable money for what they consider little gain, because they don't actually get money back for it. So you've got your work in front of you. So
Pat, you must have thought about the kinds of things that would rectify that situation. What do you see? Does the government need to wield a stick? Look, I think we had the aquarium in Melbourne with the Legionnaires. That was obviously a horrible period in Melbourne's history. Yet another one. But whatever the government did then, or be the local government, to raise awareness of cooling towers and get the registration through for all those towers, it did work. It took a couple of years. So whether they adopt a similar approach to that, that really did have the effect, and took a while to get out to the regional areas, but the CBD is a denser population, so whichever way we can get it quickly, it seems to work. I think what most people don't look at too is the testing. In Sydney or New South Wales, they've just adopted a process where technicians who are testing
the smoke containment systems or smoke management systems have to be qualified. I believe it's a 2-day course, and you go onto a register where anyone can check. That's fantastic, and it's about time something like that happened. But I think it should be incorporated into our trade schooling. Typically in the 3rd year, you either head down the refrigeration path or the HVAC path. So if you go down the HVAC path, there should be a module that they have to pass. And just by the technicians, well, soon to be technicians, knowing the systems and knowing their role and not being in doubt, so they're confident enough to actually say something, that will naturally feed into the facility managers on the sites, or to keep going through, instead of the technician probably not even recognising the situation, yet alone having the courage to raise his or her hand and say that this is a situation that could cause, a problem. Worst case, which I don't like, is maybe an anonymous portal of some sort, because as Gary knows, and any stakeholder that knows the standards, if we find a situation where we have to bring it to the attention, and just bringing it to the attention of the landlord or the facility manager, if they don't act on it, it's technically not enough. The buck stops there, and we can do, shout and sing as much as we want. At the end of the day, if the owner or the facility manager doesn't release the funds, that situation's not going to change. And it's very common when it comes to fire dampers, and in some instances, like I was saying, when the integrity of a building's smoke management system has been undermined.
Yeah. Well, and let's hope we don't have to wait for a tragedy to be the catalyst for improvement in this part. Gary, you mentioned the other day when we were talking that AIRAH's work in DA19, the maintenance guide, is useful in this respect because it clarifies some of the requirements around the compliance piece.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, when we, both Pat and I, go out to our respective clients and we discuss the fire and smoke control situation and testing regime, as this becomes a bit of when this is a shock to the client, obviously they need as much information as they possibly can then to try and make an assessment and a judgment, and whether we're just trying to get the extra business and trying to justify why our costs are greater than the current provider that they've got that are not doing the testing. So with the DA19 document, that allows us to clearly say that there's AIRAH, the body for air conditioning here, has put together the design application manual, and we can actually show them exactly the items that are up for compulsory service and servicing and testing, and the actual standard that they must meet, and it's there in black and white form. So I think it's a great document. AIRAH also run seminars that are aimed at building FMs and also for HVAC providers on testing fire dampers, smoke control systems. I've been on these courses myself, and I urge if you're in control of a building or that any of that testing, I'd urge you to go along to some of these, enroll and go along to some of these courses. They're fantastic.
Thanks, Gary. And I think it'll be interesting to see if in New South Wales, if the building commissioner takes an interest, the new building commissioner takes an interest in, because once they get beyond the construction phase, he's spending a lot of time with construction and the problems of cladding and the problems of buildings staying up at the moment. You could well expect his work to flow through to more the life cycle of building and contemplate some of these elements around maintenance and lifting standards of maintenance of particularly essential safety systems like this. So thank you for that discussion, and certainly urge anybody listening to this webinar that's involved in the maintenance of those essential systems to maintain the highest technical standards around that maintenance. Nobody wants to be accountable for a tragedy. So now let's move to the opportunities a little bit, to this flip side of, and it's an opportunity not only in improving the building stock by improved performance. I see it as an opportunity for this industry, for the HVAC industry. The opportunity is there to improve services, provide more services, by taking some of that money that's being left on the table or otherwise wasted through poor service, turn it into better maintenance, and that improves our whole industry. If I can turn to you, James, you've been sitting there very patiently. Where do you see value as being lost? Is the value being lost across performance, energy, or reliability in your view?
Thanks, Bruce. Yeah. So I guess what I tend to see as a consultant in this space is a lot of wasted energy costs and a lot of occupant comfort issues in the form of tenant complaints about either the plant not being reliable or not maintaining comfort conditions. So say, for example, if you compare with an A grade or a premium grade building, generally in those types of sites, you've got the HVAC plants all well maintained and everything's working as it should. And we can kind of go in there and fine tune the building to get a bit of extra energy savings and neighbours improvement out of it. But compare that to the mid-tier buildings, oftentimes what we find is we can't really even begin to start looking at building tuning because the plants just have so many maintenance issues that it needs a lot of maintenance work just to get it up to a baseline level of performance before you can even begin tuning. So you often find a lot of, like broken dampers or valves that don't close properly, faulty sensors, those sort of things. And all these things mean that the plant isn't capable of operating as it's intended to. And so we can't maintain comfort conditions. So we've got dissatisfied tenants. And we're also wasting a lot of energy in the process because we're either overheating or overcooling these spaces.
Thanks, James. You don't paint a pretty picture. So let's unpack that a little bit. Pat, when you service some mid-tier buildings, are you ever asked to perform preventative maintenance, or do you only ever get called in when it's breakdown?
It's pretty rare we get called in just for breakdowns. I said earlier about getting into these older buildings. That's generally how we get in, is they finally get dissatisfied with a repair they've had or something like that, or a recommendation. Somebody might question a recommendation and they just call us out of the paper. Airmaster are near the front of the yellow pages, I suppose. Probably seen our cars around, so they give us a call, and then from there we will generally push them as to find out why if there's a maintenance, and if there isn't, why isn't there? And you will generally find they're totally oblivious to the necessity to have it. And as Gary was pointing out, all about standards, they have no idea that the air conditioning factors in the safety of the building. Obviously, the fire systems, they make sense. You've got sprinklers and all that, but they're only there to finally douse the fire and look after the property. It's, as Gary pointed out, it's getting the occupants out. And once we bring it to their attention, you just see this dawning coming upon them. I find that what we have to drive the point too, that they're not the only stakeholder, we're all stakeholders in it, as is the tenant and anybody who visits the building. I generally, Bruce, I know I had a little bit of involvement with the revision of DA 19, and that has just made life so much easier. The fact that it simplifies the maintenance strategy. So it's quite easy for me to just say to them, there's 4 approaches, reactive, compliant, good practice and best practice. And at least it clearly explains the outcomes of each if you apply them, and then directs from there. But of course, we're the experts, so they say, oh, give me a summary. So I actually manually go through those 4 steps in best practice if they're going to pull the blaze down in 2 years or something like that. Mm.
And Gary, when it comes to when you're called in for maintenance on these type of buildings, what is the skill level of the person that's writing out the purchase order? They're being committed. They're having to commit funds. They're probably, if there's no budget, they're reluctant to do it. what decision-making process do you see them going through?
Yeah, in some cases, the FMs, it's an awareness piece, and they don't have the knowledge in order to look after the building. What we tend to find a lot with that type of building is that it's usually an ex-tradie that has, or the majority is an ex-tradie that has experience in electrical or plumbing, or a carpenter or something like that, and they actually want a time where it's not hard. I mean, these trades are hard on your body. Climbing ladders, carrying equipment around, wielding tools, welding, etc. It's not something you want to do later on into your life. So they look for opportunities. Facilities and building operators like that kind of tradie, because they think that tradie could help do jobs in the building itself, save call outs. So they can actually turn their hand to quite a bit. They've also got knowledge of plumbing or electrical or whatever speciality they were in. So look, they do have some knowledge, but they don't have the overall knowledge that the building requires to maintain it properly. I mean, there's a massive amount of components in the building, and it needs to function properly. During fire and things like that. So yeah, I'm finding that they generally do not have the knowledge of the testing required. And it's not no one. Well, there's very few out there that are actually deliberately going against the ESM measures testing. I mean, once they realise what they have to do, they're keen for the knowledge, and they obviously take that on board. Whether that gets received well once they have that knowledge and they have the costs associated with that knowledge to improve the support they get through the HVAC provider, that then gets met or can get met with resistance from the people that actually provide the funds. So that the knowledge needs to get channeled up, and it needs to be across the board. So to improve things, we need improved HVAC company knowledge in these areas. We need, as Pat pointed out, we need that to start at trade school. And some companies have no idea. Some facilities managers have no idea. We find very poor documentation on the building. And once you get and then the building operators want to do things on the cheap. And once you start getting all of these or some of these components together, it becomes a really hard task. But I think with awareness will come compliance, and it's all about the awareness. Reaching out and getting the FMs aware, making the HVAC companies aware, making the building operators aware, and with awareness will come compliance.
I think it's interesting that this sort of junction between knowledge and awareness that we expect to be held in people's heads versus access to knowledge. And you've pointed out that DA19 is something that makes a whole lot of information accessible. It seems to me that there's an opportunity to build on both sides, both building on the knowledge that's in people's heads, but also continuing to build on the knowledge that's captured by players like AIRAH and then made available to that broader community. James, what's the experience you have of when you step into a building? Now you're going in not just to do something that is a must-have, you're doing something that is sort of more on the nice-to-have, nice to have better performing buildings. It has some significant benefits, but what do you find from a documentation perspective? What's the availability and the state of documentation like?
Yeah, good question. I'd say more often than not, there's room to improve on the amount of documentation and the accuracy of it. If there's not an electronic soft copy of up-to-date documentation available, usually you might not be able to find anything, or it might be like a hard copy buried somewhere in the back of the plant room from a refurbishment a number of years back. And oftentimes with that sort of documentation, you have to treat it with a bit of skepticism, because it can often be out of date. So yeah, a lot of times the first step is trying to figure out what you're dealing with on site. Does the documentation match reality? And then I guess trying to get the house in order, trying to build a picture of what's physically installed on site, and putting together some sort of asset register. And sometimes that can be difficult, because a lot of times no one's really budgeted for or allowed time to go and pull together that sort of documentation and update it and compile a single source of truth. So yeah, it can be difficult.
And therein lies another opportunity, doesn't there? These buildings will continue to be there. We'll have a need to continue to maintain them. It's sort of stitch in time saves nine approach would be that we would have, in this age where the capture and storage of knowledge is so much easier than it used to be in terms of electronic digitalization of knowledge systems. Maybe the maintenance of knowledge systems is still a topic to be resolved, but we have vaster, more improved ways of capturing a lot of this information. But it's uncommon, like common sense is uncommon. But at the we've seen, if we can just for a moment, we've got a couple of minutes left, but we've seen in premium buildings, the competition for better neighbours ratings has been significant. We've seen massive savings occur across the premium end of the market through analytics and data systems have all played a role there. What do you think the mid-tier can take out of that? What can learn from that example?
Well, I think they can, and you would hope that, you know, we've marched this owner down the road of compliance, so they've got a bit of faith and they understand that the HVAC system, you know, resides in a very special space in the building, not just for temperature, but you know, it's single-handedly, well, probably the biggest consumer of electricity in the building, so so much can be done. The problem, obviously, the bigger the building, the more floors and the better the equipment, the better return. You'd often find that in a smaller building, the return on their investment is incommensurate to the sell. So that's going to make it harder to get across the line to the owner and convince them. You need to have a good motivation or ambition, and sometimes I found our experience has been that the adoption of energy efficiencies and, you know, better equipment and analytics and a BMS upgrade is at the time of when a tenant is moving in. Because then the tenant has got a bit of power, and hopefully it's, you know, a long-term lease, particularly if it's like a gross lease or something, so that any money the owner tips in or the landlord tips in, he's the one that's going to get the benefit of the saving over the long run if he set his lease based on the higher outgoings of the current plan. Obviously, the opportunities are a bit more limited because a smaller building probably won't have a variable air volume system, be constant volume, but maybe that's part of your upgrade, is to try and bring in a variable system to it. If it's a DX system, then that's going to limit your opportunity to, again, be a variable system, fixed dampers. So there's a lot of things you have to look at to try and bring it into that space. And rather than just adopting one method, like a high-efficient low-load machine or something like that, you might have to bring a whole bunch of things in together. And, of course, the more works you do at any one time, the cheaper they become, rather than, you know, coming in piecemeal to do each part of it. I know we had an example years ago when the turbo core chillers first came out, and they were the most efficient machine on the market, and the landlord had to put in a low-load machine to satisfy a tenant's re-signed lease for 10 years. So he said, how about putting an efficient machine in? He didn't want to tip in the extra money because there's no benefit to him because the tenant was paying the outgoings. So we went to the tenant and said, do you want to tip it in? And they were a significant company, and we told them why, and they went, sure. So the owner benefited because he got a much better quality machine, and so did the tenant because their electricity consumption dropped. So sometimes the success of getting these across the line is in our hands. It comes down to us realising opportunities and explaining it well. And I think both Gary and I have agreed that the success of any of compliance and getting any of this across is listening to your customer and understanding what they need, and then using all the tools you got available. And generally, once they see the benefit of one go through and the property value goes up, so does their leasing, it's not that hard to get across the line. It's just getting in there in the first place.
Yeah. And James, just before we go across to some questions, what do you think looking forward? What do you think the future opportunity is for technology in this sector to play a part?
I think part of it is going to be the analytics, big data analytics, which have been successfully implemented now on a lot of the larger premium grade buildings. So I think that can play a huge role in the mid-tier buildings, as we can kind of make the business case for that to some of these smaller sites. And just thinking more broadly, I think there's also a piece for tenant education as well. So I think one of the lessons learned from the sort of top end of the market is that it's kind of created a situation where the occupants have learned to recognise the benefits of good maintenance and energy efficiency, and they start to demand that from the building owners. And so the owners kind of know that there's this financial incentive to do their maintenance, because they know, all right, if I don't do my maintenance, my neighbour's rating might be at risk. And if I don't have a good neighbour's rating, then I'm going to have trouble attracting tenants. So if there's a way to kind of get the sort of smaller companies that are renting in these mid-tier buildings to, I guess, create a similar sort of demand for well-maintained buildings, that could be a powerful tool for change. And I think that might come down to making some sort of financial argument that, you know, if your building owner is looking after the building well, that's going to pay back in your bottom line in the form of reduced outgoings for your lease.
Yeah, it takes a pretty informed team to be able to make those arguments sometimes, doesn't it? But that's, I guess, the role of awareness raising and the appropriate training for the different stakeholders. So it's really a long-term behaviour change approach that's required there. We're reaching the end of our time. There's a question just in the Q&A that somebody has posted around how often a building is inspected for ESM compliance and by who. And then just to follow on from that is the Victorian government looking at a licence and qualification system similar to New South Wales? I don't know whether Pat or Gary might comment.
I don't know about the licensing. I'm hoping they will, but probably need to change.
Not on the horizon at the moment.
Probably not.
All right.
And I think the first question depends on what standard, but you know, we've only really talked about 1851 being the maintenance of smoke management systems or fire containment systems and the like. But there is AS 3666, which is microbial, cooling towers and warm water systems, so air handlers, which everyone goes, my building complies to AS 3666, I get the cooling tower done every month. And you go, what about the air handling? And I'm sure Gary's said that heaps of times. And you know, next thing you're embarking down that line. So the simple answer is if you had a significant building, it's more than likely you need monthly to comply to AS 3666 and most likely quarterly for 1851, depending on the year of release you're complying to, but generally quarterly.
All right, the clock is against us. I'm sorry, guys. There is another question there that would take a long time to answer. We'll save that one for another day. But thanks, Gary, Pat, and James for joining the panel today for this really important question, really important topic. I think quite clearly, AIRAH has an ongoing role in the awareness it raises, the knowledge that it can capture and make available to different stakeholders in the process in a continuous improvement piece, training and standards. Certainly the researchers, Dan, can help us see where the gaps are and how best to fill them with a real evidence base, which takes us to the survey. Don't forget to go in and fill in the survey. technology will have a role to play, there's no doubt. Better monitoring, better tracking, maintenance of documentation. There's a big role for technology, opportunity there for government to participate, to bring the appropriate sticks and carrots to get this sector, this part of the built environment sector to respond to the great opportunity of better performance. So thanks, panelists. I'll hand it back to Tony for the close.
Thanks very much, Bruce. Great session. No, really very valuable, and I really appreciate the input of all the team. Again, as Bruce said, don't forget to fill in that survey. Also, what you'll be getting very soon is an access to this recorded webinar. And please make sure people are aware of this. Please distribute to your network. A couple of other things. One thing is that Gary mentioned DA19, the HVAC&R maintenance guide. That's available to all members digitally online as part of AIRAH membership, as all our design application guides are. Also, this is part of an ongoing session of streamlined sessions. You can go to our website and look under webinars. There's an actual full schedule already for the year taking place between now and December, and we're already in planning for 2021. Again, remember, all these sessions in the Streamline, including this, are all been able to be viewed after today's session. So again, thanks very much for the panel. Thanks Bruce for leading it. Thanks Daniel for giving us access to that survey. Very important initiative. Thank you for today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and please keep in touch with AIRAH, and please keep yourself safe. Goodbye for now.